Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into 6 powerful psychology-backed techniques for long-term couples. You know that feeling? You start a relationship and you're so sure it's going to last forever, but then, somewhere along the way, the spark just kind of fades. We're going to be looking at the work of psychologist Eugenia Strotskaya to figure out how to bring that connection back.
So, a lot of relationships kick off with this incredible passion, right? But after a few years, things can settle into a routine. The conversations feel like reruns, like you've already talked about everything, and that connection can start to feel, well, a little boring. You might even catch yourself wondering, did I make the right choice here?
Well, if that hits close to home, the very first thing you need to know is that this shift is not your fault. It's not a personal failure. It's actually a totally predictable biological process happening inside your brain. So let's break down what that really means.
So here's the plan. We're going to start with why that initial spark seems to fizzle out. Then we'll get right into a whole toolkit of practical techniques. We're talking positive communication, shifting your mindset, and finally, building a partnership that's genuinely fair and really built to last.
Okay, get this. The actual chemistry of your love literally changes over time. Your brain in year 1 is wired differently than your brain in year 5. This isn't just some vague feeling. It's a real biological shift. And understanding this is the absolute first step, because it means the tools you need in year 5 are totally different from the ones that worked back in year 1.
So in those first few years, your relationship is basically running on dopamine. That's the neurochemical that gives you that feeling of reward, excitement, and that craving for something new. It's a powerful rush. But over time, the bond shifts, and it becomes based on oxytocin, which people call the bonding hormone. That's what creates deep intimacy, comfort, and security. And look, the shift itself isn't the problem. The problem is that we often stop actively nurturing the relationship once we get comfortable in that new, stable oxytocin phase.
All right, so how do we actually nurture that bond? Let's get into our first set of tools. These are all about actively creating positive communication, not just sitting back and hoping it happens, but making it happen. Now, some of these might feel a little weird at first, but trust me, they are incredibly effective at rebuilding those positive habits.
You know, it's funny how our brains work. We have this built-in negativity bias. When something bugs us, we're super quick to say it. But when we think something positive about our partner, a lot of the time, we just keep it to ourselves. So this technique is all about flipping that script. Here's the challenge for you. A minimum of 10 compliments, out loud, to your partner every single day.
And get this, not all praise is the same. Strelskaya suggests you split those 10 compliments into 2 types, gratitude and admiration. Gratitude is thanking your partner for what they do. This really works well for people who tend to feel guilty. Admiration, on the other hand, is praising them for who they are. This one lands deeply for people who are more prone to shame. So play around with it. See what really resonates with your partner.
Okay, words are great, but they're not the whole story. You've got to pair them with physical connection, especially when you're in that oxytocin phase. Touch is one of the main ways our bodies release that bonding hormone. And we're not talking about some big, dramatic, romantic gesture here. We're talking about the small stuff. Consistent, light, even playful touches all day. A hug, a hand on their back, a quick kiss. These little things constantly reinforce that bond and send the message, I see you, I choose you, and I'm still very attracted to you.
All right, let's talk about the big one, those arguments. The ones where you just keep going in circles, you both feel completely unheard, and you're just not getting anywhere. For those moments, Strelskaya has this radical technique she calls the empathy bomb.
So let's paint a picture here. Imagine you're in that classic, recurring fight over having kids. One person's feeling the pressure of their biological clock, the other feels backed into a corner. Accusations start flying. You're selfish. You just don't get it. You can just feel the empathy draining out of the room, right?
Okay, I know this is going to sound totally bonkers, but stick with me. This is where the magic happens. Right at the peak of the fight, you just stop. You literally get up, switch chairs, and you start making your partner's argument for them, using their words. When you literally say their words, you're activating what are called mirror neurons in your brain. It's like a shortcut to empathy. You might suddenly realize their hesitation isn't about rejecting you, but maybe it's coming from a deep fear of failing as a parent. Often, the whole conflict just dissolves into laughter and, more importantly, real understanding.
Okay, so we've got the communication tools down. Now let's move on to the mindsets. These are like mental frameworks that can completely change how you see your relationship and your partner.
So, when that feeling of routine starts to creep in, you can't just let it happen.
You have to actively fight back with newness and connection. Here's a great exercise. Sit down together and list 10 fun things you used to do when you first started dating. Then, commit to doing one of those things every week. On top of that, and this is non-negotiable, 1 hour of talking every day. All phones, TVs, screens, completely off. It might feel a little forced at first, but it will bring you back to each other.
All right, this next one is a total game changer. It's a mental trick for dealing with those little things that drive you nuts. You know what I'm talking about. Every partner has these little flaws that are probably never going to change. Maybe they leave socks on the floor or they chew too loud. Instead of letting it get to you, you consciously relabel it in your mind. This is my marriage tax.
Think about it like this. We all pay taxes for things like roads and schools, right? Well, this marriage tax is just the price of admission for all the amazing benefits you get from the partnership, the support, the intimacy, the security, that shared life. When you frame it that way, it takes the sting out of it. It becomes an acceptable cost for something you really, really value.
Okay, for this next one, you're going to need a pen and paper. It's an exercise designed to get your expectations and your reality back on the same page. You're going to write out, in detail, 3 different views of marriage. First, your ideal, fantasy marriage. Second, your real marriage, the good and the bad. And third, what you honestly see when you look at the relationships of your friends and family.
And what you'll find when you do this is pretty amazing. You'll probably realize your ideal marriage is, well, a little unrealistic. You'll be forced to see all the good things in your actual relationship that you might take for granted. And when you look closely at everyone else, you'll see that nobody's marriage is perfect. What this does is it closes that gap between your fantasy and your reality, and that's huge. It helps you really appreciate and fall back in love with the relationship you actually have.
All right, last but not least, let's get down to brass tacks. We're talking about the practical stuff, the foundation of your home, who does what. Because resentment over chores can quietly poison a relationship, so you have to tackle it head on.
So the key principle here is something called equilibrium. Basically, a partnership feels fair when each person's total contribution adds up to 100%. So for example, if one partner brings in 60% of the money, maybe they handle 40% of the household stuff. And if the other brings in 40% of the income, they pick up the other 60% at home. And notice, it's not about everything being a perfect 50-50 split. It's about balance across the board, so both people feel like they're pulling their weight.
And look, this isn't about keeping score like it's a competition. This is about being open and honest to stop that quiet resentment from building up. The process is pretty simple. You list out every single chore imaginable, from taking out the trash to planning vacations. Then you sit down together and assign who is responsible for what. And this is so important. It's not a one-and-done conversation. It's a living, breathing agreement. Anytime life changes, a new job, a baby, you sit down and you rebalance the whole equation.
So, when you start putting all these pieces together, the praise, the empathy, the fun activities, the fair workload, something really powerful starts to happen. You're not just fighting off negativity anymore, you're basically creating this overwhelming flood of positivity. And the small stuff, the little annoyances, they just can't survive. They get washed away.
So I guess the big takeaway here is this. A great relationship isn't something you just find. It's not about luck or finding that one perfect person. It's something you build piece by piece every single day. It's about choosing to create something amazing together. If you found this useful, please give this explainer a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know what you think in the comments below.